Welcome, everybody, to the Lessons from Leapfroggers panel. We've got Amit and Julian and Nicos and Derrick all here to share some of what they're learning and seeing on this question of leapfrogging. And I think one of the guidance we got as a panel is mix it up, get sparks flying, don't spend too much time BSing. So we're going to get right into it. And hopefully sort of question the premise of the panel, like to what extent are we actually seeing leapfrogging, or do we expect to see leapfrogging? How much of that is technology driven versus driven by other business model aspects? Where do we see technology actually making learning better versus making business models better? And so we'll dive into all that as we go ahead. First, we're just going to go down the line and start with some stories or examples, particularly on this theme of where you see technology in each of your ventures doing something that you think is really powerful or transformative. So that could be just some corner of the business or the business model where you see technology playing a really interesting role. And as you do that, just give a little context about what's going on in your venture more generally. So if we can start down the other end with Amit and come down the line, that would be great.
Great, thanks. Briefly, Amit Sevak with Laureate. Laureate is a network of colleges and universities based in the US. I'm based in Singapore and handle Laureate operations for South and Southeast Asia. In terms of the question of where in our institutions do we see technology being used to do some interesting things, we, like many colleges and universities, can you guys hear me, by the way? Is it, okay. We have been on the journey of putting in place a learning management system. Typically, when Laureate acquires or partners with a college or university, one of the things we like to do is start looking for opportunities to engage with students more and look for some efficiency. So having a learning management system to bring in blended or hybrid or online learning makes sense for us. So we made a decision a few years ago to standardize on one learning management system. We use Blackboard. Is it a great system? It is. It's the system that we use as our default corporate-wide global system. And it has some positives, has some challenges. But one of the things that we did in that system was we decided that we wanted to really innovate from the get-go. So not just put in a system, but think about how to make it really interesting and engaging. And so we decided we really wanted to track student outcomes as best as we could. So we picked a couple of metrics like time on task, particular interactions, and we started to really track those. So we, I think, have used business intelligence and reporting capabilities to track learning in a way that we never did before. In a typical brick and mortar campus environment, when a teacher is doing their chalk and talk, there's not really a sense of tracking the learning. But now with some of the tracking mechanisms and regular monthly reports that come out and semester-wide reports, I think we're doing a much better job of tracking learning along the way and at the end. A lot more needs to still be done. It's not as sophisticated as we'd like it to be. But that's one area. I think it's the data analytics aspect of learning that I think we're starting to get our handles on. And what's neat is we're doing it in markets like India, Malaysia, Thailand, that it's pretty innovative in these markets to do that kind of thing. It may be common for an online university in the States or in Australia to be doing it, but it's for a brick and mortar to start doing that type of stuff we're pretty excited about.
Great, thank you. Julian?
My name is Julian Kannigan. I represent an organization called A1 Capital Educor Holdings. We are the only focused private equity fund that concentrates solely on higher education in the private sector in Africa. Our organization, Educor Holding, has 7 brands, an average of annually 100,000 students, and we're the largest provider in sub-Saharan Africa. Our business is largely traditional in the sense of the face-to-face model. However, what we're finding is that utilizing social media and an online presence, and that is assisting us with access. It's assisting us with student support services that allows us to have greater throughput and a greater outcome at the end of the day. And in the South African market, that's important because it just leads to employment attainability. And so that speaks to the market, and we are seeing the evidence of utilizing technology, not so much in the sense of being disruptive, but in enabling specified outcomes to all stakeholders involved.
Great, thanks. Nicos?
Hi, my name is Nicolaou. I'm the CEO and founder of UNICAF. And UNICAF is an online platform operating in mainly sub-Saharan Africa. We have currently about 8,000 students, and 95% of the students come from sub-Saharan Africa. We take programs from US, British, and European universities, and we offer them online in Africa. The main challenges, as you can imagine, in operating in Africa has to do with technology. So when you have to consider what types of software you're going to use in terms of the LMS, the student information system, and others, you have to take into serious consideration the limitations that are in place in Africa. Even when it comes to our digital marketing campaigns, we have to take into serious consideration the way the students in Africa operate. That I think now 75% of them access all our marketing campaigns through their mobile phone. So we have a lot of challenges in trying to understand how they use certain things on their mobile phone. We had a student who actually wrote an entire presentation using his mobile phone, and because our software will detect the platform, the operating system, etc., that students use. And this whole technology issue as it relates to Africa is very important because we have to design our material in a way that is downloadable by the students, just because they don't have electricity all the time, they don't have internet all the time. So it's quite challenging, but we managed to make this work.
Great. Derrick?
Hi. So I work in the Philippines. I know I don't look like a Filipino. That's where I work. We started in 2010 with the idea. So I have to back up and tell you, Ayala Corporation is the group that I partnered with. In 2010, we started to talk about it. In 2012, we opened it up. We started to do experiments. In 2013, we opened our first junior high school. We now have 23 high schools. And last year, we acquired a college. We'll acquire more colleges in the years to come, this year and next. Today, we have about just under 10,000 students. By the end of this year, we'll have 30,000 students. Yes, we implement technology. It's a very technology. I mean, the Philippines, I don't know how much you know about it. Let me tell you a little bit about it. 100 million people, a bunch of islands. There's about 100 islands where people live. There's a handful of islands where most people live. It's very technology constrained. But one of the things we've done is we just haven't taken no for an answer. We have found some very aggressive ways to go after technology. We've implemented a full technology platform, learning content management system, Chromebooks, all content, everything. And it costs us about $100 per year per student to operate that system. And so, as I was telling Di earlier, our students spend on average about half of their time learning from the learning content management system. And what's powerful about that is we've been able to increase class sizes and yet decrease the student-teacher ratio. Our students, if you walk in our classrooms, our teachers are interacting with our students on a 1:5, 1:10 ratio on a very, very frequent basis. Students are working in cohorts. They're getting most of what they need. They're understanding their projects, their problems, and their cases from the LCMS. They're getting their tools, their explanations, their examples, all from the LCMS. There's students who can guide themselves through entire domains. I'm talking about years of a subject matter without even engaging the teacher, if they're bright enough, fast enough, and can carry themselves with a cohort group. So we have been very effective at implementing technology. Without technology, we couldn't be doing what we're doing today.
Great, thank you guys. So we just talked a little bit about everyone's own venture. I'd love to hear other stuff that you guys see going on in the geographies, in the realms you guys are operating in. Like, where else are you guys starting to see the beginnings of what you might consider leapfrogging, or at least a transformative, business model or technology that you think might have outsized impact? And here we can just open it up to anyone who wants to talk about something inspiring they've seen.
I mean, for me, there's the part of education that's accredited, where students are getting an accredited degree, an accredited education that's regulated. And then there's the unaccredited side. And a lot of the really neat stuff I see happening in South and Southeast Asia, particularly in places like Indonesia and India, is in the unaccredited space. So there's a number of online platforms that are providing short-term courses, sometimes $10, $15 courses or less, in everything from project management to data analytics to IT programs. And these are really scaling fast. I like
this
to
is
think,
like lifelong learning,
exactly. It's for working adults.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite interesting because it's scaling fast, and there's multiple players in these markets, and you'll see them in Bahasa in Indonesia, you'll see them in the Thai language. So it's local language skill offerings, unaccredited, and that's scaling quite fast. It's this kind of e-commerce of skills. And so just as we see e-commerce booms in multiple places and they make the headlines, those are typically in product areas. I think what I'm seeing is this e-commerce marketplace being created for skills. And I think that's interesting and that's cool. And at some point, in fact, the chat I was just having just before I came here was the possible connection of the two, that over time, competency-based learning is this big buzzword in the States and in Australia. And you can see the worlds colliding or merging, maybe a better phrase, of where a lot of these skills that people are getting recognized for could eventually count for some credit over time. So for me, it's interesting to see all these platforms getting created. In the U.S., there was the whole MOOC period, and then it sort of died down. But in these markets, there are local language versions of it that are actually adding value, and people are getting certificates, people are getting education out of them. And they can be self-paced or video-based education. It's not super fancy or sophisticated, but it's meeting local needs of getting transmission of knowledge and skills at a faster rate than they might otherwise be able to get it. And in the example of the Philippines, you mentioned Indonesia is a country of 20,000 islands. It's spread around just like the Philippines, a couple thousand. And so people in many of these countries can't get access to any kind of education of that kind, very specialized skills. So I think that's something that I'm liking, and I'm seeing that happening more in the unaccredited free market that's out there, the wild, wild west.
Yeah. Are you seeing anyone in the accredited space get at all, nervous or thoughtful about what's happening, disruptively in the unaccredited space, or is it all just an add-on right now to what's going on in the accredited space?
I think they're largely operating in parallel, at least in the markets that I'm serving in. I don't see them. I mean, there's folks observing both sides, but I don't see that merger happening. And part of it is the accredited space is regulated. So there's a Ministry of Education in all of these countries, just like we've got the DOE, the Department of Education here in the States. So the accredited group is somewhat looking for indications from their regulators about what they can and can't do. Yeah. And sometimes the more progressive ones are trying to influence rules or legislation. But by and large, I would say the average accredited institution is trying to do stuff within, looking more for incremental innovations, where I see the more disruptive stuff happening outside of the accredited space. Yeah.
Other interesting stuff you guys are seeing?
Yeah, well, again, as it relates to Africa, the biggest issue is trying to increase access to quality higher education. There's 1.2 billion people in Africa, and like we say, they need to build 10 universities every week of a capacity of 10,000 students for the next 12 years to meet the capacity needs. And if you ask any government in Africa, you ask the Nigerian government, they say, what are your plans about building universities over the next year? They say none. So all the students have no opportunity in getting an accredited degree, especially an internationally accredited degree. So what we're doing is through our online and blended learning offering, making this happen. So we allow thousands of students to study at affordable rates and earn an accredited, internationally accredited degree. To give you an example, we have an MBA degree from a US accredited university, which we only sell for $5,500 in the US, in Africa. So to make this happen, we have to be very innovative in what we do and how we do it without jeopardizing the quality of the program. So I think this is something that is going to be a challenge for the next 10 years, perhaps in Africa, because they can't keep up with the pace.
On our end, I think I'll give a little more context about the Philippines again, and then I'll talk about where we're emerging some technology. So the country is, if you look at the economy, the socioeconomic status of the economy, you're talking about, you've got A, B through E, right? E are the indigent. These are people who don't know where their next meal and their roof will come from. And that's 30% of the country. The next level up, D, is the folks who are living on about $500 to about $1,000 a year. A month household income. That represents about 60%. So if you do the math, there's not much left, right? The C level of the economy is about 10%, and A and B is literally 1% or less. They argue about whether it's 1.1 or 0.8, right? But what's the difference? And so, you know, what we've done when we've gone into this is we've sought to serve the D market and the C market too. And so what we do is our junior high school is priced at $500 per year. Our senior high school is priced at $750 per year. Our college is about $1,000 to $1,500 per year. And so our technology is included in that. What we've done from an employment perspective, and this is leading to your question on tech, what we've done from an employment perspective is we've been able to achieve that those who are seeking work when school is over, which, believe it or not, in a country like that, you'd think it would be 100%. It's actually about 85 to 90% are seeking work when school's over. 90% are employed within 90 days. Out of college, we've been able to get people against control groups of the same third-tier schools. I say third-tier schools because I'm talking about those CD market. When you talk about third-tier schools, we've been able to improve wages by 29%. Out of our high school, we ran a model senior high school because the situation over there is that they're one of the last countries to implement K through 12. There's less than a handful in the world left that don't have a K through 12 system. They're one of the last. And so we ran a model senior high school. It goes into law in 2016, but we started a model senior high school in 2013. Our kids coming out of the model senior high school, coming out of the public system and into that system, they spent 2 years with us, and when it was done, they were earning over 14,000 pesos on average versus a college graduate from a tier 3 school that typically earns less than 13,000 pesos, to give you a sense. Now, how does that lead to new tech? The thing is, we have to scale this. We're about to go from 10,000 students to in 7th, 8th, 9th grade and college. We have these 23 high schools all over the place. We're about to have 30,000 students. So technology has always been our answer when we scale this stuff. Whenever we're scaling this curriculum, the content, the process, teacher training, technology is part of the answer. So it's part of our answer in scaling our employment network as well. And what we're doing is we're building a portal. And that portal is a place where students go in, and with every class they produce something, they put it on a CV. So they'll create a CV, curriculum vitae, in their grade 11, and they'll start building that CV, and they start inputting projects and problems and cases, and they say, I have this decision-making capability, I have this critical thinking capability, I have this logico-mathematical capability, and then they put links to their products, to their outputs. And we have employers coming into that portal on their break, on their lunch, whenever, at home in the evening, grading those things, grading a marketing project, those kinds of things. And we're connecting those kids with that portal. This connects them to employers, it connects employers to our schools, and it enables all the work immersions, all the on-the-job trainings that we do when school's over. And this will take what has been a manual process up till now, where we call people up and say, hey, I've got these kids coming out, they're really great, you want to see them, we send them an interview. It all puts it online and scales it, so we just don't have that human cost of sourcing all those kids out and helping them find work when it's done.
Great. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on how much you believe this sort of leapfrogger story, and maybe we can kind of tease out what we mean by leapfrogging. So if you take, and maybe you guys will have a different definition of it, but if you take leapfrogging as the idea that some countries in the geographies where you guys operate are going to move beyond a traditional model much more quickly to some next generation model that is fundamentally better in terms of quality to cost ratio. And then in the, I guess, classic theory, you might start to see some of that reverse imported to other less resource constrained countries over time. Like, do you guys actually see this pattern happening, where you see at some reasonably large scale the next generation models coming to bear, and then starting to see some reverse importation? Like, I'm curious whether we as a panel are sort of bullish on that idea or bearish that that's actually happening.
I'll go first. It's going to happen. I'll go out there. I'll put a flag in the ground and say it will happen. I'm meeting lots of people who are working in China, who are working in Asia. Asia's hopping. Asia's happening, and there are some very interesting things going on there. We're gaining ideas from all these people we partner with. We don't look at them as vendors. We look at them as partners. We got a partner who can shoot internet over mountains via radio wave and accomplish high-speed connections. And I'm not saying that's going to save Chicago schools, but there are lots of things we're doing that can help save Chicago schools. And the reason is because they're desperate to improve. And we're not desperate to improve in the United States. And so they're willing to give space. The Department of Education came, they looked at our radical model of schools, they asked us to move a statistics class from one sem to another. After that, the guy said, I totally approve, and if I had a kid who was 16, I'd put him in your school.
Yeah.
And they're desperate to improve. The Department of Education has given us the space to work. They're pro this. They're open. They're looking at ways to do this stuff. So the problem in the United States is that it's bogged down with regulation. It's bogged down with big, massive systems. It's bogged down with, there's not an openness to change and to move and to create. They're tying the hands of teachers with tests. This kind of stuff isn't necessarily the problem over in a lot of Asian countries. And in the Philippines in particular, the reason I'm there, people ask me all the time when I'm on planes, why aren't you working in the US? And the answer is exactly that. Because I can get stuff done in the Philippines. I can't get it done here.
I'll give a different view to spice things up a little bit here. So, Bill Gates has said that people tend to overestimate technology in the short term and underestimate technology in the long term. And when he means short term, he means that 2 to 3 years. And when he means long term, he's referring to usually about 10, 12 years. And so I think that's my view of some of this question around leapfrogging. My sense is that there's a lot of excitement, and I do see some of that happening. But I think that by and large, it's going slower than I think people, because ultimately you've got the regulatory regime that you're working under. It's regulated, and so K-12 is regulated, higher ed is regulated, and if you have a forward-looking leadership team in that government that is opening things up and making it possible. But a lot of these countries don't have proper rules for online education, for example. How do you get a degree online? How do you get one that's of quality? How do you test outcomes? They're not forward-looking in these areas. So that's a constraint. While 4G is and Wi-Fi is in many, many places, it's not in many, many places. And when you look at a place like Africa, I mean, we're talking about countries that have 5–10% participation rate, meaning 8 or 9 out of 10 folks are not going to college today. They just want access to a brick and mortar location that's reasonably priced, that's accredited and recognized. They don't want fancy education on a tablet right now. They just want basic education. So I love innovation. I love technology. I'm absolutely love to consume it and experiment and pilot and test. But I think for scale, it's I think we want to be bullish in the long term, but a little bit more cautious and not getting too frothy. And conferences like this that are about ed tech, that are about how technology is disrupting the status quo, this is exciting, and things are happening. Things are happening, and that's exciting. But I think in terms of how it scales and implements, to really impact, I think it's a little bit more mid to long term. I don't see a leapfrog for a lot of this stuff happening in the short term, in these markets.
Go for
it. We operate in South Africa, and we're operating in 5 other African countries, and each country comes with its own challenges and its own set of circumstances. Just to give you an idea, we were sitting at a board meeting discussing a property acquisition to start a university, because that's the first port of call, as my colleague Amit has just said. People see, and they look at the building, and that's what they come for. And before we could start talking about broadband, internet, cloud, all of that, we had to talk about a simple issue of power, because we didn't have power for 3 days. You don't have power for 3 days, having all the MOOCs in the world is not going to help you. You're not going to get access stuff, you're not going to send out a quality education, and simply the stuff's not going to work. And that's the manner in which we operate on. But I'm going to be bold today and say that because we operate under those circumstances, what happens is that, Nico, maybe you can say, we have to engineer our minds to start thinking a lot more, because we take nothing for granted. We have to work around problems and look for solutions arising out of these things. And I think what we're going to see in the next few years, that you're going to get a lot of disruptive stuff coming out of continents like Africa, where we have to work under those circumstances. And just to give you an idea, we applied for a university license in Kenya. And one of the partners we're talking to is Safaricom, who own M-Pesa, which is mobile money. Now suddenly you have a cellular operator that operates as a bank. In a South African context, one of the largest providers of mobile technology and cellular data is MTN. And we're in discussions with them just to move our content across their data lines. So, ordinarily you might not do that in some of the more developed countries, but we have to engineer our minds to working along those lines. So I think, you're going to see a lot more activity, certainly across the African continent, where we have to think seriously out of the box to improve access, quality, and an outcome at the end of the day in education.
Yeah, and that sort of makes me also want to hear your guys' thoughts on it, as we think about this, leapfrogging happening, or at least next generation models coming to bear. If you guys see stuff happening in the developing world that is genuinely not happening in the US or the developed world, what is it exactly that's happening? When we talk about leapfrogging, my brain often goes to, okay, how is technology, first of all, how is technology driving better, quality for cost as regards learning? Is that actually where you're seeing things, being fundamentally, the envelope being pushed in the developing world? Is it technology for learning? Is it other aspects of business models? Like, where do you guys see the leapfrogging actually happening? Nico?
I agree with my colleagues about all the kinds of problems that you face if you operate in a continent like Africa, for example, but there are always solutions. And I can give you some examples. I had a meeting with Microsoft about this issue of not having enough internet penetration in most of the countries in Africa. And they're working on a big project, I think it's called White Spaces. They use the TV signal, and there is an empty bandwidth that they will use to transmit internet. I know that Facebook is investing billions or hundreds of millions in taking internet in Africa. So it's like when they had no phone lines at all, and suddenly they all use smartphones. So they jumped a generation. Now, I think, I'm more optimistic about what will happen, in a sense that soon enough, because all these big corporations are investing a lot of money in the continent, they see that it's potentially a good market for them. I think it's only a matter of time that will happen. And I think when you speak to, and I speak a lot with government officials, they are very interested in making this happen, and they are very helpful. It's like we just acquired a university license in Malawi, and like Julian said, the biggest problem was that we are about to build a campus, and in the area where we chose, there is no electricity, there is no water, there is no switch, and it's like a nightmare to solve these issues. But if you decide to operate in these geographies, you have to take it for granted that that's the kind of problems that you have to solve. Otherwise, everyone will do it. So I think that looking at this in the next 4 or 5 years, I think you would see that Africa would be a completely different place in terms of technology and opportunities available for offering high quality higher education.
A couple of things I see interesting in the developing world that maybe I'm just now been out of the US for 8 years, so I don't see it as much in the developed world, maybe because I'm not here as much. But one thing that is really exciting, and Nico touched on it, is really different types of partnerships with industry, with companies. to come up with innovative solutions for their needs. So in India, the outsourcing is huge, just like it is in the Philippines, right? And so you've got call centers, that are operating and supporting developed countries. And so the training and education required for 3-4 million call center folks in India, or 1.5 million in a place like the Philippines, they've got massive training that's required. And so thinking through how are they going to solve their education problem for that industry is a really exciting challenge. And so I think that's interesting. I think that's different. And then that ties into one thing I'm seeing that's a trend all over South and Southeast Asia is technical vocational education for scale. India right now is going through this Make It India, this real big focus on pushing manufacturing and job creation in the country. And that's leading to a creation of all kinds of needs for education that's skill-based, practical, hands-on, industry relevant, and now. And so those kinds of paradigms I see happening in a much more creative way. I find, at least in the US and in Europe, those things perhaps happened in the past. I find that they're a little slower, it's a little stickier, it's not as dynamic of a conversation between education and industry. And again, this may be because I'm a little bit dated, but at least when I was serving in education in the States, I didn't see that level of intensity as I see it. And part of it is, these countries are growing. And so there's a push from these leaders of industry to get educators to get engaged with this stuff. So I see that happening more. It's more dynamic, it's more fluid, it's more exciting. I see industry pushing regulators more so than I was expecting, and associations. So that's something that's dynamic, and I think is really pushing the envelope and producing potentially much more different kinds of corporate partnerships with educators that could lead to new forms of education, new forms of training. Yeah.
Where else do you guys think we're going to see business models push past the developed world most quickly? Because you could think about, technology could drive better marketing. It could drive better data and analytics on how we actually, give feedback to educators on how students are learning. It could drive better, engagement with employers or e-portfolios. Like, where do you guys think the top 2 or 3 areas we're going to see big impact or big envelope pushing most quickly, even if it's a 10-year time frame that we're talking about? Where do you think we'll see the impact first?
Well, so I think the panel would agree on one thing. Not that we don't want to make sparks fly, but I think the panel would agree on one thing, and that is that we're not doing anything that's not being done in the U.S. It's just being done on really small scales in really small experimental spaces that are allowed to do it. You can find examples of online colleges. You can find examples of career portals. You can find, there's guys here selling that service to universities.
Yeah.
You can find examples of Chromebooks being used in schools and learning content management systems and all that kind of stuff. So it's not a question, I think, of whether we're going to bake something in these foreign countries that all of a sudden America's going to go, oh my gosh, we never thought of that. In fact, most of the ideas we get, most of the concepts we get from America, we export to a place that's willing to do them. So I think I don't think this is a technology question. I think the unlocking of leapfrogging is a question of when the United States as a whole wants to change. When they want to wake up and say, our education system was built for the 21st century. It was about transmission of information. We need to teach people to think. We need to develop intelligence. We need to give people skills. We need to stop trying to transmit a bunch of information for people to put on paper and give them inert equations they don't understand to regurgitate onto a test. When that happens, then the whole thing will get unleashed. And I don't think it will get unleashed from us. Unless that takes 10, 20, 30 years from now and we're so far ahead that the United States is behind. That's
sort of what I'm curious about. Like, where are we actually going to see that, if at all?
I think Julian made an important point about the cost-value equation, right? So Clay Christensen's whole innovator dilemma is all about how the innovators tend to come from the bottom, and they tend to come up with low-cost solutions that meet much of the needs or emerging needs of a client, right? And so a lot of the disruptive innovation that I anticipate that will come from developing countries, that will help develop countries, is delivering a good education for a lot cheaper. So instead of spending $30,000 a year in the US for a college degree, if you can get 80% of that education for $3,000, and that's being delivered in India or Indonesia, that education in the US, that's going to change things. And that's what folks like College for America are doing, right? Or some of these competency-based learning models that are now getting created. There's 5 or 6 licenses that the Department of Education in the US has just recently approved to offer that kind of education, where suddenly you're going to have low-cost education that's delivering maybe not the entire experience of a $30,000 education at a pretty liberal arts college in Massachusetts, let's say, but it'll deliver a decent education with the skills and the relevant needs to help that person be successful. And I think that time is going to happen. I think that time when low-cost, reasonably good quality education, that's going to scale in developing countries faster, in a place like in Africa or in India or Philippines, and suddenly that's going to then become something that's going to be a wake-up call, where you don't need Stafford loans, you don't need all this government-backed subsidized loans, which is just a big fraud anyway. And you'll actually have good, reliable education being delivered at accessible amounts that Americans can come in and go, wow, I can get a good education at a private institution or a public institution, and I don't need to mortgage my future to do so. So I think that's what I'm excited about. It's a different way to mix value and cost. And that'll have some technology, but it's more about just a different mindset that's fundamentally different from the so-called Harvard model that really built up the big high-cost tuition education model in the States. So, I see that in the next decade. I see a complete change in that model. And there's a lot of books that came out on this. There's the Do-It-Yourself University. I mean, there's a lot of people that believe this is coming, but I'm starting to see it. I see more and more universities in the U.S. experimenting. But that's why I see developing country models really helping the developed.
And Nicos and Julian, since you guys are both active in higher ed, I mean, I think this theme you're talking about of how do you create the same, sort of bang in terms of outcomes for a much lower buck, right? But for much cheaper. And if you're going to try and do that, so I think one place you do see a really different mindset in the developing world is, even in the US, you're starting to see this debate about what is college for? Is it about job? Is it about that? When we're operating in Rwanda and Kenya, there is no doubt every student we talk to is like, job. I want a job. And so I'm curious, if we're starting to see that really get pushed, and especially when you think about online models, which both of you guys are running, how do you drive that job outcome piece through an online model where you don't have the on-the-ground presence to create the employer connections, to run the career services in a really thick way? How are you guys thinking about that piece?
Well, I think it's not a question about inventing anything new. I think it's a question of taking what's already being developed or is currently being developed here in the US and adapting it to work in Africa or in Asia. And Julian mentioned an example before about technology, and as it relates to Kenya with the M-Pesa. Here in the US there are hundreds of millions being spent on mobile payments, and in Kenya you have a system that 75% of people are paying using their mobile phone, and it's not implemented anywhere else. So there are innovations that are not maybe available here in the US, but are available in Africa, because the only reason that these mobile operators invested money in implementing such a system is because they don't have a choice. People want to use, people don't have accounts in the bank, so the only way they can pay is using M-Pesa. So this is one example, and there are a lot of other examples. So as it relates to education, I think the major innovation is trying to make everything work, taking into consideration all the limitations you have with lack of technology, lack of internet, lack of electricity, and making an adaptation to your system so that it's accessible by students.
I see an opportunity also in the most distressed inner city schools in the United States. I think higher education, there's an opportunity, but I think in those places there's going to be enough distress soon enough. They're realizing realizing they can't come up with a bunch of great teachers who are going to save everybody, waiting for Superman, right? And they're realizing it has to be a systemic change. And So they'll look for systemic solutions, and so that may be a place where they are willing to take an alternative system in and give it effort, give it opportunity. The charter system continues to grow, and there's some freedom there, but it's hamstrung by tests, right? I fundamentally see that as soon as we stop being so beholden to all these tests and start letting let schools do what schools should do, and find other ways for us to look at whether schools are doing their job, then I think that a lot of this stuff will import, and probably in the distressed places first.
Yeah. Other thoughts on that? Otherwise, we could save the last 10 minutes or so for questions. Anyone have any questions for the group or thoughts on what we've been talking about?
We talk about cost value when you're comparing U.S. and some of the Asian markets. When you look within your own markets, it seems like there's quite a range of price points that you described, from $500, Derrick, to $5,000. I'm just curious, when you decided to focus on these different, that's a big difference in these markets, right? What was some of the thinking, whether it's a social thinking or it's a financial business model thinking, in choosing those different segments that you did, just talking through that, whether it's Laureate or...
In our case, we price programs based on what is the minimum cost we have to deliver a quality program. And it's not so much, we don't have so much choice, because in the case of a British degree, we're regulated by QAA, so it has to meet certain standards. In the case of a US degree, by whichever is the regional accrediting body of the partner. So you have to do things in a certain way that have a certain cost, and then I think that's what's driving your pricing model. But it's also that we have a lot of statistics about the number of people from Africa that's studying overseas, and the number of people that are going to private universities in Africa that are of a similar price range. So we offer an internationally accredited degree at the same price you would get a local degree from a private university. Let's say in Nigeria, they would charge for an MBA something like $8,000 to $10,000. So we're almost much cheaper than even a local degree. And for most of these students, they have no other opportunity to get such a qualification at that price.
Yeah, I think pricing is, just a quick follow-up to that, pricing is, for me, a little bit of an art and a little bit of a science. The science part of it is in the socioeconomic triangle that was referenced earlier of, folks at A, B, C, D markets, where you say the average middle class is a C minus, let's call it, in that pyramid. We tend to play typically in the B, C markets. And we find that that's the sweet spot for us in terms of being able to deliver the quality level that we want to deliver at a reasonable price, right? So that it's accessible and affordable. And so what that means is our education in a place like Thailand, for example, is about $3,000 US for an international degree, English-speaking degree. So $3,000 US a year. For a higher education degree. In Malaysia, it's about $5,000 to $6,000. In India, we're at the premium range, which is between $5,000 and $7,000, where the average private higher education in India is closer to $2,000, $2,500. So sticking with BC, one other insight for me that I've seen across countries is looking at it from a household income standpoint. And so if you're able to get data of what is the household income of your addressable market, and whether it's private K-12 education or private higher ed, typically 20 to 30% is the maximum range that you'll find. And so that's another way to think about pricing.
Sorry, 20 to 30%?
Of the household income of the family.
Is the max you can
Exactly.
push
So if the
out.
household income of that family annually, right? So if the household income is, let's call it $20,000 of your addressable market, then 30% of that could be the maximum price that you could charge. And if you're doing it in a K-12 context and you're thinking of 2 children, then you have to kind of factor in siblings and so forth. But that's another way to think about it. And obviously checking competitors and checking other markets. Online changes the game, because in the working adult context, that provides all kinds of scalability, and you could move up and down that pricing and provide a little bit more flexibility. But traditional brick and mortar, those we tend to stick with BC. We tend to stick with 20 to 30% of household income, and we usually do quite a bit of market research. And then the art part of it is then just go for it and see what happens, especially if you're launching a new program.
Yeah. We have another question in the front.
Yeah, I'm just interested in what role and innovation you're seeing in student financing, because it sounds like affordability and access and the ability to pay go hand in hand, right? And there is a lot of innovation happening in student financing globally. What examples have you seen in your markets and what impact is that having?
And just in case anyone in the back couldn't hear, the question was, the question was about what innovation are you seeing in student financing specifically?
Yeah.
So, interesting. Ayala Corporation is a conglomerate. Think of Tata Group, except on a smaller scale in the Philippines. We own the most prestigious bank in the country. We don't use any financing from them. No financing to the kids. Okay. But what we have done is we've made the kids employable. The country as a whole has this cultural perspective that no matter how poor you are, no matter how dirt poor you are, you should go to college and not have to work, which is crazy. I got 3 degrees and worked through all of them. And we're changing that mindset. That's what we're doing. That's the innovation. We're changing that mindset that you can work when high school is over and work your way through college. And we're getting kids, we're fixing their logico-mathematical intelligence, we're fixing their ability to communicate, and we're giving them skills so they can go work their way through college. And this is going to create a revolution because there's 1 million pent-up jobs in that country waiting to be filled if there's the proper skills coming out of high schools. And our kids are getting eaten up by the industry. I mean, we have Accenture has hired our high school kids to do college, usually college graduate, F&A, finance and accounting work. And those kids are working night shift, working their way through college now. And so that's simple innovation. Make them ready to work and empower them to work so they can change their life.
And as other folks answer this question, I'm curious, are you seeing innovation in student financing that enables student financing to go beyond lending against household assets or parental income and look at either behaviors or employment outcomes or other predictors of repayment?
Just to give you guys a South African context, because it was in the news, I think globally in the end of last year, with a campaign that fees must fall. The students at the public universities wanted free education for all, and they marched to the union buildings, which is the president's office, and there's an entire commission of inquiry around this. But insofar as it relates to our business, we find with an emerging middle class, I mean, like 20 years after apartheid, there's a growing middle class, and it's just growing by leaps and bounds each year. And we're sitting at that segment on that middle class, and I think we're seeing that throughout Africa as well. Emerging middle class, I think it's got one of the best numbers, maybe outside of India. But with regard to a South African perspective on the fees must fall, government's trying to come up with all sort of innovative ideas, but unless the system doesn't help itself in terms of a repayment policy, to some extent, it's almost like a black hole that no matter what you throw at it, nothing's going to give. And what's happened is that the parents, I think, are becoming more responsible at the same time in terms of what do you want to give your kids. And that's what we're seeing in a South African and in an African perspective. You'd be amazed the kind of sacrifices people make to send their kids to school. And I think Nico and I we can tell you stories until the morning about how these things actually happen. And that's just the African story around finding innovative ways. Villages get together to send a child to school. And like if you look at our former late president as well, Nelson Mandela, I mean, he said, you educate a child, you educate a village. It's that kind of paying it forward and those kind of things that are happening on African solutions for Africa. So those are the kind of things that we're seeing on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, just very quickly, I'm starting to see it. It's still early, though. I would say the vast majority of what I see is still traditional families, individuals and parents or families paying for their education. Of our students across all of our Asian markets. I would say less than 10% of it is coming through third-party institutional financing through a bank or some sort of an international student lending group. But it's starting to emerge in pockets that I wasn't expecting. There's a Japanese insurance company that is providing a type of insurance that is for higher education. So it allows parents to save a little bit as an insurance policy, but that insurance policy could also be pulled for higher ed. And that type of model is something that's now being franchised in several Southeast Asian markets, which I thought was just an interesting way to think about it. There's some banks I'm starting to see, some not the international multinational banks, but some of the local banks are starting to test different student financing. I see that in India and so also seeing it in Indonesia. This is not in the Asian markets I'm currently serving, but in a prior life when I was working in Mexico, there was a lot of international student lending entrepreneurs, a company called Finai that was doing some great work. And then I am seeing, to the example that you raised, quite a bit of employer investing happening now. Back to my earlier point about industry getting much more involved. Lots of internships where you'll find the third year or the fourth year of college being effectively paid for. And students are starting to get pitches along those lines when they're considering enrolling in the institution. So if you've got a 4-year degree and you have some probability that the last 2 years will be paid for, that can sway you towards going to that institution. So these are different aspects, the insurance example, the Finai example, the example of in industry paying for part of it, that's starting to emerge. But it's not the formal institutional Stafford-backed or Title IV type funding that you're seeing in the States.
We have 1 minute left. Any other burning questions before we wrap up? One more?
Sort of related to the last point that you just made, what innovations are you seeing around the business model for offering these like education technology or online programs or whatnot? Student pricing is one thing that's sort of inflexible. Are there other business models that you're seeing emerging, maybe related to employers providing internships or promising to pay for 2 years of their education? Anything like that you're seeing that hasn't been discussed yet?
Yeah, the employer partner, it's very difficult. What a school has to do is they have to really engage an employer partner. We send our design development team into employers to analyze jobs that they have a hard time filling. When we do that, we're able to turn around and provide them sometimes just 2 dozen people that impress them, and all of a sudden a positive catch-22 starts to happen. Then they're opening up a lab on our schools. Then they're starting to give kids scholarships if the kid will take their program that directs them in their direction. So you have to step outside of the normal school environment, go in and create a win for that employer, and then all of a sudden you start drawing them in to become a partner employer, and then they start investing. And now at this point, for example, I mentioned Accenture. We have a 50% success rate. 50% of the kids that apply from our schools to Accenture are hired, and those guys are setting up labs, giving scholarships and everything.
Any other thoughts on that?
Can I add a quick comment?
Quickly, yeah.
Yes, we're seeing in India especially, we're seeing specific industries a lot of employer-driven aid for providers. But that turns into both a find the student, whether it's a guaranteed job or so that model is down. But it becomes a little staffing chain, which is the company is really hired not just for the training but also for the search. So in effect, the model is they go out, find people, they train, and the company guarantees they pick up at the end. So in effect, it's a paid form.
I agree. That's where I see much of the innovation is the industry linking with educators to come up with things that address their particular need, in India in particular.
Yeah, just to give you a South African perspective, is that it's legislated that there's a levy that employers have to pay for each employee, and a fund is created arising out of that, and that fund is utilized for skills training.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.